Okay, we are live. Hey, hey.
Sweet.
I know, pretty exciting. So I just want to welcome everybody. I'm going to give everybody just a minute to come on in. I've got it up on Facebook Live so I can see when people are coming in. Happy Wednesday. I know I do most of these on Tuesday. However, I had a meeting last night and Alan was gracious enough to say yes to joining me on Wednesday. So I just want to give everybody a minute, give them, some time to circle in and join us. Last night and Alan was gracious enough. I had to turn down my volume. Say yes to joining me. Okay, good. And we have Katie. Have you ever met Katie Goodkin Morales?
I don't believe so. No.
Yeah, she has a 501c3 down in the Dominican Republic. She does extraordinary work down there.
Awesome.
Yeah, she has, it's weird. I don't have any of her jewelry on. I always have her jewelry on. She does Larimar jewelry and just some extraordinary stuff. And we pair up and do a lot of stuff together. But and hopefully we're going to get her our friends down in the Dominican Republic as well. We got Sally Johansson. Hey, Sally Jo, it's great to see your face too. Thanks for joining us. And Holly's on. So people are starting to circle on in, which is really, really exciting. Let's see. You can share it there. I'm going to share it there. Share it there. I just like to share with people, let them know what we're doing. Okay, perf. All right, good. And Debbie's on. Debbie came with me up. Debbie and I went back and forth to Tallahassee a couple times for both of those bills, the hotel bill and the vacation bill. Yeah, I know. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Oh, good. Kim Curry's on. This is so great. And Gary, wow, good. Yeah, I think we're going to have a big crew tonight. Alan, I think we're going to have a big crew tonight. So this is Jan Edwards with Paving the Way Foundation, and it's such a delight to have you on tonight, Alan. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to introduce yourself and really say your background and what you're up to and what you're currently doing now. But I just in the anti-trafficking space, we're a very tight-knit group. There's probably under 100 of us doing this kind of work on the ground, level. And Alan Wilkett has become one of my favorite human beings. I met him through the Pasco County Human Trafficking Task Force, and he is a fierce and passionate warrior in this realm. And he retired, right? So there's a part of me's going, oh, boo, but at the same time, it's like, oh, yay, because now you're outside here in this side of the system, right?
Absolutely.
So why don't you just share a little bit about your background, how long you were with Pasco County Sheriffs, how long you've been working in the anti-trafficking space, and we'll kind of launch from there as we debunk this myth of human trafficking doesn't happen in rural America.
Well, first of all, thank you, Jan, for the invitation to be on here tonight. It's just a delight to be here on a Wednesday evening to spend the next few minutes talking about something that we're all very passionate about, and that is ending, not just stopping it in its track, but actually ending it, which means going to the root causes and actually ending human trafficking. So we're all very passionate about that. And some of the names that you mentioned are dear friends as well. And of course, Jan's a friend of mine. So just a little bit about myself, and it's going to be brief because I'm rather unremarkable. To be honest.
So not true. So not true.
But I have 27 years of law enforcement. So 27 years total. Some of it was spent up north, and then of course came to Florida in 2003 and started with the Pasco Sheriff's Office in 2005. So I had about 15 years with Pasco, but 27 years total. Much of my career, both up north and down here, was spent in child abuse investigations and some of those types of criminal activity. When I came to Pasco, I was so passionate about ending human trafficking. And Sheriff Naco, of course, was very gracious to be behind me and working in this particular space, and gave me a lot of liberty to really develop this and push some of the windows. And even when it wasn't real popular and a lot of people weren't talking about it, Pasco really jumped up ahead of this and said, we're going to make a difference in this space. So I spent 12 or 13 years of my latter part of my law enforcement career really working to combat human trafficking and to stopping this scourge on humanity. And was privileged to command our human trafficking task force, set on several of the task forces in the area, including the Tampa Bay Area Human Trafficking Task Force, the Clearwater back in the day, and so on and so forth. So again, not taking a lot of time to talk about those things, but now I have the privilege of being retired in the law enforcement space,
Yep.
but not retired from fighting against human trafficking, and had the ability to join with Bridging Freedom. Bridging Freedom is a great organization that provides a safe campus for female minor victims of human trafficking, sex trafficking in particular. And but also in the space of not just providing the safe campus, which is kind of a core activity for
Right.
Bridging Freedom, but also outreach and training as well. And that's really where my world is not working in the campus environment necessarily, but working in the outreach and the training side. So we're launching a campaign here in the next month or so, which is going to be kind of a cool campaign to expose human trafficking in several different layers, but also to become aware, and then some of the action steps that we can take to end human trafficking. So I'm delighted to be on here tonight. Enough about me. I want to talk about the issue.
You're so great.
It's good. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's, well, you know what, it's really interesting. This is turned out to be such a great platform. You know, Facebook Live, at first people get a little, they're like, what? Because it's weird, because you're literally talking to no one and talking to everyone all at the same time, right? Talking to a green dot so people can get connected with you. But yet on Facebook, like, you know, you can see people kind of scrolling through and how it goes. And I just want you to know that Amy O'Rourke is on, and Eddie Babbitt Ray is watching, and he wanted to let you know that you're missed, and Kim's on. So we have several people that, you know, they know you and they're on watching. So, you know, you've done a lot of work in Pasco County, and Pasco County is for sure one of the leaders in the state in this conversation. You know, they're the first ones that brought someone in to come in and train their schools. They had a very aggressive, you know, task force doing a lot of outreach. And Pasco County is also kind of in a rural environment. And a lot of times people assume, you know, that Vegas and New York and Chicago and Dallas, you know, these big cities is the only place this happens, when in reality it happens everywhere. So why don't you share with me a little bit, you know, what you've seen over time inside the rural space of America in fighting human trafficking?
Well, that's always an interesting dynamic, and the misconceptions that we have fought in this fight. So those that are online that you mentioned and that I know very well, we all know that there's a lot of myths that surround the human trafficking fight.
Yep.
You know, we have fought, it's all an overseas problem, and we had to kind of do an education campaign on that. It's interesting because the TIP report of 2019, which just came out in June, one of the statistics that they use, and I thought this was incredibly important for all of us in this fight, is that according to their stats, and they're the most comprehensive report in the world when it comes to human trafficking, and they just released their 2019 report in June. And one of the stats that they used that came from the ILO, and it was backed up also by the UN's.
What's the ILO? Can't you got to use, you got to assume people are listening to us do not know the acronyms we use.
That's that old cop coming out of me. It
I
always has to be the alphabet. So the International Labor Organization, they had the stat, and then the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, which kind of oversee their human trafficking space.
Right.
They substantiated this, and that is 77% of all trafficking happens in the country of origin. Now, I think that's a remarkable stat.
Say that again. Say that again.
77% of all trafficking happens within the country of origin. So that means if you use that global stat and just apply it to our nation, the United States, that all the trafficking that we have here in the United States, 77% of that is not foreign base coming into the country. 77% is our own citizens being trafficked inside the United States. So that myth is something that we've had to fight, and the education has went forward. So I
Yeah.
thought that was a remarkable stat coming out of that new TIP report that just landed in June. But when you go to your question, Jan, and that is the rural component. So in the United States, as we all know, we have an urban, we have a suburban, and a rural environment that
Yeah.
our country resides in. So you have the urbans, the inner cities, you have the suburban, and then you have that rural setting. And as you said, some of the misconceptions is that all of this is happening inner city, or it's always happening in the urban environment. And it is happening there, but it's also happening in the suburban environment. And it certainly is happening in the rural environment.
Right.
What I have found in my experience has been that each of those present their own challenge and dynamic. The urban environment has its own unique environment. Suburban has maybe some different tactics, but the motives are always the same. The tactics may change a little bit, but the motive is the same. And then when you push that out into the rural environment, you certainly have human trafficking happening, both on the labor side and on the sex trafficking side.
Yeah.
It's happening in the rural environment, and the tactics may be a little different. It may have a different look to it, but it has the same motive. It's the same crime that is happening. I'll give you one example, and again, I'm gonna try not to do all the talking
Well,
tonight.
no, that's okay, because you know me, I have no problem interrupting you. Um, I want you to separate out labor and sex, right? Especially in the rural environment, because I think
Okay,
the assumption one would be over the other. And I just, you know me, I love facts. I'm a very fact-based kind of girl. So let's kind of separate that out for people and address, one of each of them one at a time.
so labor trafficking is going to be the illicit use of one's labor against their will. So force, fraud, or coercion would be
Right.
the means or the elements that would be utilized to force someone into a labor environment. And that in a rural environment, some of the big ones are going to be your agriculture. Agriculture is huge. Landscaping, which can go across all three of those, but landscaping certainly in the rural, but agriculture is going to be a big one. So agriculture, your landscaping, but your restaurant environments, things of that nature has a labor component to it as well, or a risk of labor. But agriculture out in the rural, so you have the orange groves, you got the sugarcane fields, you
Mhm.
have the lettuce fields down in Immokalee, which a big federal case came out of there. That rural environment has that labor component.
Right.
Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, the labor side is going to be a foreign worker who's been brought into the country, whether it be on a labor visa that is documented, they overstay that visa, or if they come into the country illegally and then they go out into the fields for survival, or through some sort of arrangement that's been made by a broker, a labor broker. So that's where your labor trafficking is going to come in. Your sex trafficking, and again, we could talk about brothels, we can talk about residential brothels in
Mhm.
suburbia in particular. You're going to have your brothels that are going to be in store environments and sometimes in the back of massage parlors and things of that nature in urban environments. But push that out into the rural. Somebody told me the other day, they said, oh, there can't be any brothels out in the rural because all you have is cow pastures and dirt roads. And the fact of the matter is that the brothels, while they have a different look than what maybe an urban environment does, they are active in the rural environment. Let me give you a case in point. We had one in
Please.
particular where it's a trailer setting out in the middle of an agricultural field. You had an
Wait,
orange
wait,
grove,
a trailer.
a trailer.
Okay.
You have, it's a mobile brothel brought in on purpose to quote it, and I hate this word, and you know I do, to service the labor workers who were here illegally, and they didn't want them to go into town to get those sexual services. So they
Right.
actually brought a trailer, parked it into the middle of the agricultural field, and right there was a mobile brothel that was being done there in the middle of rural America. You have these mobile brothels.
Which
So
also
it's
would
going,
keep the laborers there, right? Because,
absolutely.
because they're already not making a whole lot of money, right? And so whatever they're making, they're actually going to pay these girls, these women, which keeps them in the cycle of poverty, and keeps them there. Like they can't, there's no way for them to save their money. There's no way for them to make any kind of difference for themselves or
Well,
even attempt to get out.
yes, run that scenario out, Jan, that you just started. And that is you bring a worker in from wherever. They're brought into Florida. Let's bring them into the Tampa Bay area. They're put into a orange grove to work. They're
Right.
working 78 hours a week. They're making $200 for that week. That $200 though becomes a debt bondage to them because they're paying for their food, they pay
Hmm.
for their clothes, they pay for the cot that they sleep on. And
Yep.
so what they do is they bring in the mobile brothel to once again take away another portion of that money, that $200 that they made for 80 hours of work. So you got wage theft, labor trafficking, and sex trafficking happening in that same sphere. And that same worker is being exploited on several different fronts because of the way that that dynamic works out in that rural environment.
Right. So you've got, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And unless I'm driving through, whatever highway XYZ in the middle of nowhere, there's no way I would even know that that's happening because there are always trailers in the middle of fields, right? I'm thinking it's for the farmhands. Now we can
Sure.
all kind of look and go, well, wait, I wonder what that is. So we're going to stay in the agriculture, that kind of side. So let's say I'm driving down, highway, whatever, in Pasco County or Citrus County or Volusia County or Lake County for that matter, and I see that. And we talk about this all the time with kids, and you and I, it's like that when you get that gut feeling, because your eyes don't always match what your brain catches up, you get that feeling. What should they do? What should we do?
Well, well, obviously, we need to report that. Even if it's a suspicion, it needs to be reported. So if it's a suspicion and not necessarily an active criminal activity that's happening in front of your eyes, but it's a suspicion, then the National Human Trafficking Hotline is a great, at least a place to start. There are some other calls that could be made as well, online, the texting, and then of course the hotline number if it's a suspicion. If you feel like there's an active criminal activity that's happening, then of course that call needs to go into local law enforcement by 911 because there needs to be an immediate response to that. And I think it's important to look at some of the indicators in those particular. So
Yeah, sure.
you might have a pool of workers that are working, and maybe you have noticed that there are females, typically more than one, but two or three females that may be coming in and out of that trailer that's setting in that field.
Mhm.
That may be a little bit suspicious because the work typically was in a male dominated environment. And now all of a sudden you have these two or three females that seem to be just kind of coming out of the trailer back and forth. Those types of activities should raise that suspicion level
Mhm.
enough to at least make that call so somebody can go and take a look at that. One of the things we've done in Pasco is we also teamed up with our Department of Health, who has an inspection component to
Oh,
the
that's
migrant
so
camps.
good.
So when we went in and trained them, it was almost immediate. I started getting calls from inspectors saying, man, Alan, the stuff you were talking about in that presentation, I'm seeing it out here in the field. And so we were able to raise the tips, the awareness and the education piece and the action piece, the actual intelligence, by simply bringing education to those who already have a responsibility to do an inspection in those particular environments.
Yeah, really, really great. So that, so we're clear on the agriculture space and, there's a really powerful advocate here, Linda Woods, and she does work with the workers in Immokalee. And um, the interesting thing she had said is, when they came into, and I'm going to put in quotes, rescue them, right? They're looking around going, well, this isn't quite so bad. There's no one shooting at me. I get at least one meal a day. I have a roof over my head. It might be a little crowded, and I have hot and cold running water. So I'm not sure why you're taking me away because this is better than what I left.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
and
And
the context is
that's one of the
decisive.
challenges. Yep.
Hmm. The
And that is
context
one
is
of the challenges of that type of investigation
yep.
is because while we may recognize from our side
Yeah.
that that is a criminal activity that's happening, a lot of times from that victim or that worker's side, they are choosing to do that because it is better than where they came from.
Right.
So that's one of the challenges that we have. And oftentimes it's not just educating the public. Sometimes it's making aware the victim or the worker what what can be expected of them, what should be owed to them. So sometimes that education piece has to be done across the board so that everybody recognizes we're talking about the same criminal activity.
Right. It's interesting. I had a conversation with a group here locally last week, and we were talking about the signs and understanding. And, inside the immigration space, people are brought over under false premise, their passports taken away. And then the next thing you know, then we have COVID happening. And so maybe I got hired to be on a maintenance crew, or maybe got hired to work in a hotel or work in a restaurant. And now all this stuff is shut. And now you've got even more people going, well, okay, now what am I going to do? Well, people buy sex. So now they're putting themselves even at greater risk in an environment where they have no protection. Somebody has their passport, and that's the kind of stuff we can actually, keep an eye out for. And there are individuals that are, I'm going to use the word professional in that they've been trained to prostitute, right? Someone has trained them and shown them what to do by coercion, force, fraud, threats, all of that. And then there's people that are like, well, I've heard this is how I can make money. So I assert you would see the difference, and then we can make that call.
Yeah. And we are going to discover, going to your point, Jan, in particular, we're going to discover coming out of COVID-19 and as whenever that is, and as we assume whatever normal is going to look like, we're going to see that what is a gut feeling in most of us right now will be borne out with statistics that human trafficking, sex trafficking, did not diminish during COVID-19, but it increased. Yeah. And we're already starting to see some of that evidence. Strip club in particular, you got the dancer in there who may be being prostituted inside that club in the VIP rooms and things of that nature. But when the clubs closed down, sex trafficking didn't stop.
No, it
but
didn't.
You have managers and bouncers and traffickers who were taking the victims that were working in the club, and now they're working them through private homes in a subdivision, or out in the rural. Here we come back to that rural component. They're actually taking them out to rural because they think they can do it under the cover of darkness, or hidden in plain view out in the country. And they're dancing, and they're setting up these brothels with these sex workers who are not paid a workman's comp. They can't apply for some sort of assistance because they're independent contractors, which just drives me crazy that we don't have any way of licensing, regulating that particular industry, because the strip club hires them as an independent contractor. And so when something like this happens, there's no fallback. Now survival kicks in. And the only way they can do that is to be really exploited. And that's the key. They are exploited beyond measure into those types of activities.
Yeah. And Dr. Toll with Aspire.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I love that man. We did a 3-week series, 2 weeks in English, 1 week in Spanish, debunking myths. And he was one of my last guests on. And, what he shared, I share his interview a lot to have people really get and fathom and get the understanding that there is no choice for the people that are trapped in this environment. There's so much trauma done to their brain. There's so much force and threats and, drug use to manipulate that, their experiences, they have no choice.
Absolutely.
And he said it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 years just for their brain to heal. It doesn't count the rest of the body, just for their brain to heal from that kind of trauma. So there is no leaving. And these survivor warriors, they don't sometimes even know they're victims, right?
Right. And it really goes to 3 different things. And so these 3 things I have seen in that manipulation space. One of those is the trauma bonding that we talk about a lot of times, where the victim gets bonded to their trafficker. also known sometimes as the Stockholm syndrome and some of those kind of things. So you have that dynamic that's happening. Sometimes it's survival. It's just to survive.
Yeah.
And so you have the substance abuse, mental health component, and that survival. I just need to survive this. What kind of control is that when you're driven just to survive?
Yep.
I have a 3-year-old at home that I've got to get groceries to and get him to the doctor and a place to. So that survival instinct is probably one of the strongest instincts that we have as humanity. But I think the other one is gaslighting. And we have not spent a lot of time talking about gaslighting and its role in human trafficking.
No, we
where
haven't.
the manipulator,
People don't
the
even know what
trafficker,
that is.
I agree with that. So the trafficker manipulates the victim into thinking that she or he is crazy,
Yeah.
that they're just making this up, that it's not really as bad as what they think it is, that they really have it pretty good.
Yeah.
And in that gaslighting mental condition, that victim becomes subservient to that trafficker through that gaslighting technique. So those 3 types of techniques are used over and over through that manipulation scheme.
Yeah, for sure. Now, we've talked about agriculture traffic, and labor trafficking, agriculture, restaurants and such. This has been an unprecedented time. We have more children online now than ever before. They've been doing their school at home. They've been, their parents are working and trying to help with their schooling. And we've seen a rise in divorce rates. We've seen a rise in child abuse. And you and I both know there's been a rise in child trafficking. And online's everywhere. It's not just in the big cities, it's in rural America. So let's talk about that a little bit.
So the recruiting tools are, so there are 4 stages to human trafficking, as we all know. So there's the recruiting.
Well,
so
not everybody knows. There's probably some new people listening. So let's, you got to pretend sometimes, Alan, we're talking to people that have never heard this conversation before, because when we replay it or people share it and post it, they're going to go, oh my God, I had no idea.
Okay, so there are 4 stages to trafficking. There is the recruiting. So the recruiting is that phase where the traffickers are getting to know the potential victim, finding out vulnerabilities, weaknesses, family dynamics, things that likes and dislikes, comforts and discomforts. So that recruiting stage is there. Then there's the grooming. The grooming is where they are actually conditioning the victim, the potential victim, to enter into the life of sex trafficking in particular. And so you have that grooming stage, and that grooming stage can be gift giving and promises of love and promises of jobs and promises of shelter and taking care of family, and all of those kind of things can happen in that. And there's also can be a threat piece to that as well, that it may not just always be love. That's the most common tactic, but it may be a threat component to it as well. And then you have the actual trafficking, and that's when the victim is actually put into the life, whether it be a male or a female. They're actually put into the life, and they are being trafficked or exploited sexually or through labor, but sexually, as we're talking about now. And then comes where they become part of the process. So now they become a recruiter. So not only are they being trafficked, but now they're so involved in the life that they become a recruiter, which presents a big challenge to law enforcement.
Oh, yeah.
Because now I have a victim who is actively recruiting, and the law looks at that and says, do I have a victim or do I have a criminal? And so that educational piece inside of law enforcement, both in the prosecution side, the judicial side, and in the enforcement side, has been long and arduous for that culture shift to happen, and recognize that even though they may be involved in a criminal act, they may still be a victim. And in most cases, they are, who have been through the process so deeply involved that now they become a recruiter into trafficking and bringing other people into the life. So those are the 4 stages of human trafficking. And when you talk about sex trafficking of children, that recruiting and that grooming piece in particular is moving to the online space by leaps and bounds, great percentages. One of the percentages that we're seeing right now is that about, and I think the number is low, but about 60% of all recruiting and grooming is now happening online. 60%, and I think that number is low.
I agree. I've seen things as much as 80 and 90%. So that's really where, you know, and we have parents in this, you know, quandary of I'm trying to work, and you know, my kids flying through their 8 hours of schooling in 4, and they can't go outside, they can't play with their friends, they can't go to the mall. Like, what do you do? You're going to go online
Well,
and
and the
play video games.
challenges, Jan, as you know, the challenges is that that space evolves so quickly that just when
Yes.
you think you have a handle on it, something new emerges. And in fact, it's probably 2 or 3 steps by the time we actually, and I'm going to talk about law enforcement and probably parents, by the
Mhm.
time we understand one piece of technology, our kids are already probably 3 steps removed from that. So we have the online space, which can be social media, Facebook, which I kind of laugh about because that's kind of the old people's media. And now
It
the kids are
is.
not really on Facebook unless they're just trying to show grandma and grandpa that, hey, you're monitoring me. But it's
Yeah.
so Facebook, but you have you have your Moco space and different ones like that that are out there that most parents are not aware of, but the kids are residing there. And then
Mhm.
you have the app world, and that
Yes.
app world is really scary because you have encrypted messaging systems, which are what 9-year-old or 12-year-old needs an encrypted messaging system.
They
But those
don't.
things are out there. So you have the Wicker Me's, and you have all those types of things that are out there, Telegraph and on, that have that encrypted piece. And so the challenge is huge when we deal with this. And so what I would say to parents is, by the grace of God, for the sake of humanity and the sake of your children, be a parent.
Yeah.
This is not a time to be a quote unquote best friend. This is
No.
a time to be a parent and monitor those things and get a handle on that. Because, and I've said this, I don't believe that fundamentally our kids are bad. I think our kids are
No.
fundamentally good. They're curious. And so these traffickers become really good at using their own curiosity
Mhm.
to really drive them or drag them into these
Yeah.
dark worlds. And
Yeah.
once they're there, the shame and the guilt
Oh.
is what keeps my 13-year-old involved in that lifestyle, because now the guilt and the shame that I fear I'm going to bring on my family is more
Mhm.
than I can bear. So we
And the
have to understand they're not
recruiters
bad, they're
and
curious.
and the recruiters know that. Like, they
And
know,
without a
because, you
doubt.
know, yeah, it's like I preach this. Their prefrontal cortex is not completely formed yet. Yet we're
Yes.
interacting with them because there are areas that they're far more mature. Like, we weren't that mature at that age, right? They're so much more mature than we are. And so we have it that they're older than they are, not really, you know, understanding that this isn't fully formed yet, you know, and the recruiters know this and they use it. And
And that shit.
they'll either guilt manipulate them, right?
Yes.
Or sweet talk them. Either
Yes.
way, it's going down a dark path.
It's going down a dark path, and they're using the natural curiosity to drag them into that darkness. And once they're there, that child doesn't see any way to extricate themselves from that.
No,
And so there becomes the hopelessness and the despair and things of that nature that we see oftentimes in our kids.
absolutely. Kim Curry's on here, and she was saying, especially in familial grooming, you know,
Absolutely.
familial trafficking is the highest percentage that I've been told by other law enforcement that we work with. And you know, you're already breaking a fundamental trust.
Right. And it's interesting that that was made, because that was going to kind of be my final point when we talk about sex trafficking out in the rural component in particular, because
Mhm.
what we see in the rural areas is that familial pimping is huge.
Mm,
Isolation,
yep.
migration, the fact that they have to be, the isolated nature of being in a rural environment really lends itself to a lot of familial trafficking, whether that be, and I'll just say this, and then I'll try not to talk as much, but the case that I worked that still probably brings the hardest memories to me, and I have PTSD, and I've been very open about that. Diagnosed level 2. Um, a lot of the memories working in this space in particular are the nightmares that I see at night. It's
Oh
the
my God,
pacing that I
yeah.
do in my house, and so the face that I can never shake is the youngest victim that I personally have had the opportunity to help with the rescue, and that was an 8-year-old girl. This little 8-year-old girl was pimped out by her two uncles, and it happened in a rural community, a rural farm, a little piece of land stuck way up on a dirt road. And they actually sold her for a 6-pack of beer, a carton of cigarettes. You could have a birthday date with their niece and would dress her up in little pink outfits or whatever and have the birthday date. I can't shake that out of my head.
No.
And that didn't happen in areas that sometimes we associate with heavy trafficked areas, the urban. That was in a rural piece of land, 3 or 4 acres, sitting on the end of a dirt road. And the trafficking that happened in there was probably the most vicious and one of the most vile. That these hands held that little girl, as I saw, that eyes that they say is the windows of the soul. And if that is true, her soul was full of despair because her eyes were empty. And I looked at that, and that's trafficking in rural America.
It sure is.
Right there.
Yep. And I was on an interview earlier today, and she goes, so, where, when people fund organizations, where does that money go, right? And for us, it's to prevent that. For us, it's to be in front of those school-age kids and talking to them about this. So that gives them a window to whether they have a conversation with you or I, or they have a conversation with their teacher, or they have a conversation with their athletic director. It's their eyes are now open to what's happening to them is not normal. It's not okay that someone does that to a child in the environment of, housing. It takes care of that child to help heal them. And, I've got Joe Lopez is on. He's running for Orange County Sheriff. He also sits on my board. And, he asked a great question, because this is what everybody always asks. So where were the parents?
Yeah. And in this particular case, the mom was in prison, drug-related charges that we see so oftentimes. Dad was nowhere in the picture. Dad was gone. And this child was being raised by a grandmother who, in my view, was complicit, if at the very least, was complicit in this, and then actually perpetrated by these two uncles. So we see this dynamic, this dysfunction. And Jan, you said something that absolutely is very, very, very important that we understand, and that is that we got to get ahead of this. We got to get in front of this.
We do.
Nobody wants to talk about we talk about the prevention side, but we're not really there. But if
it's not exciting. It's not exciting.
Right, it's not.
There's a reason why they had they had a TV show called ER. They don't have a TV show called Eat Salad and Exercise to not have a heart attack. They don't have a show that says don't drink and drive. It's against the law, but there's no show that shows if I didn't take that drink and I didn't drive, then I actually saved a life and, got to become this extraordinary human being out in the world. And I remember when I started this conversation 7 years ago, almost 8, people thought I was nuts. They're like, why are you talking about prevention? I'm like, well, I know what it looks like on that side. I'm not okay with that. How about we just interrupt that? Let's disrupt that cycle, and that's really where education comes in, and education of the parents, education of the educators, education of the athletic directors. And I'm going to keep going, right? Education of our businesses, education at malls, education at Starbucks, education at Dunkin' Donuts, education at skate parks, education of our parks and rec people. Like every single person is trained to know what this looks like. And there is no place for these people to hide, because we now know what it looks like, and we're going to interrupt it. We're going to call 911. We're going to do something. We're going to take some kind of action to save that child's life, literally.
Yes.
And whether it's their physical life, that you're holding them, right? Rescuing her from that horrific environment. And thank you for doing that. Thank you. Okay. Do you get that?
I got that. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. I'm talking to the green dot, I'm talking to you. And at the same time, there's online. We got done with a training at a middle school in Seminole County, and less than like 5 days later, some guy tried to have a little 12-year-old girl, take an inappropriate picture and send it to him. But because we had the conversation, because she knew about it, she knew what to do, she told her parents, they called Mo, of course, because it was in Seminole County, and they called the administrator, right? So like there was actions for them to take. Now, is that a literal life we saved? You betcha. Because now there's no shame, there's no guilt, there's no embarrassment. She knew exactly that these people are manipulating her to make her feel that way, and it's not okay, and you have rights. You have rights as a human being, and you have rights as a child. Sorry.
And I think, I love what you said. And Jan, you are one of the most passionate people when it comes to that prevention side. But what you said is so critical, and that is, in this movement, we have been working very hard, and rightfully so, on victim-centered approaches and trauma-informed care and wraparound services, and rightfully so. We have to be there. But probably the two things that remain to be somewhat undeveloped so far is what happens when we do bring somebody out of the life, get them stabilized. Now we need sustaining activities where they can have careers to go into, and records expunged, as we know that Brent Woody works on. And I don't know if Heather's still on the call or not, but if Heather's still on the call, she works very diligently and hard on creating those sustainable careers. But the other side that is still undeveloped is that prevention side. And if we don't stop the stream as far upstream as we can, we're going to be constantly wading into the water and rescuing one at a time. We have to stop it from happening.
Whack-a-mole. It's like whack-a-mole. Yeah. And and I said to somebody, I said, we're not going to arrest our way out of this.
No way.
It's not. And quite frankly, we're not going to educate our way out of this. And there's a piece, because when people ask me about what we do, they're like, well, Jan, how come you don't take on the demand? I'm like, hang on. You got it. I know my lane. Okay. I'm very clear about my lane, but rising tides lift all boats. Now that we're starting to really gain some traction on the prevention side, right? You've got these two bills up, one's in the House and one's in the Senate, to actually have human trafficking education be across the entire nation. I'm not saying it's handled, but there's things happening that are going to have that happen. It's about time for us to take on the demand. It's about time to go beyond a hand slap and $500 fine.
I totally agree. And in my view, and you've heard me say this many times, reducing demand and going after the buyers is one of the key components.
It is.
I personally feel like that the buyer should be held equally culpable as the trafficker for the trauma that's being done to that victim. Equally culpable.
I agree.
If the trafficker can get 15, the buyer should be able to get 15. Why? Because both of those are the exploiters of the trauma that's being put into our children and to those that are being victimized. So until we get serious about the buyer and the demand side, then like you said, we're just playing catch up. Always.
We're always playing. It is. It's whack-a-mole, and that's look. You and I had a conversation last week. I have, there's a vision for what I'm out to create and what I'm out to alter. And, inside the prevention space, there's really only about, in reality, there's people that say they do it, and there's people that are actually doing it. There's probably about a dozen organizations across the country that not only do prevention education, but actually do a good job, right? Which is good. Right. We need a few more, because there's plenty of business to go around. There's plenty of people to educate. It's now, I think, really a time to start taking on the demand side, Alan.
I agree. And that's going to take, that's the courageous stance, because when you look at the demographic of what a buyer really looks like, it might be your neighbor. It could be the person you borrow money from at the bank. It could be the lawyer down the street. It could be the police officer. It could be the senator. It could be buying goes across those demographics. And to have the courage as a country, as a nation, to stand up and say buying sex is not acceptable, period.
Yeah.
We don't care who you are, how much power you have, how much money you have, Jeffrey Epstein, or any
Yep.
of the others.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what your station in life is. It
Nope.
is not acceptable, and you're going to be held accountable.
Yeah, it's not okay. It is not okay. And that's where, you know, and anybody that's watching our live, you know, if you are being called, if something is rumbling inside your brain or your guts, like, I got to get involved, right? Good. I'm going to type my website in here. If you want to get a hold of Alan Wilkett, I'll come back and look, and I'll give him your information. I'm not going to do vice versa. You know, if this is something that calls for you, whether it's prevention, whether it's ending demand, or whether it's restoration, we all got to get on board of this. And here's the thing. Everyone can do something. Everyone, right? If you just put that phone number in your phone and you see something, you make the call, that's the difference you made. You want to make a donation of $10 or $25 to an organization that's doing this, that's going to make a difference. If you want to go volunteer in an environment, go make that difference, because one by one conversation at a time, we really can end this. This is actually preventable. And I'm going to get a little controversial here just because I'm so riled up about this. 800,000 children a year go missing in the United States. 15,000 children a day die of hunger. We got to speak out for them. We got to be their voice. And I'm inviting you to join up with me and Alan and Kim and Heather and Amy and all the other people that are on this thread, like arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, and take a stand for our kids. They're our future. They don't have a voice. We're it. We're the ones. So I'm inviting you to do that, right? So you can tag something down here in the conversation. You can go to our website, which is pavingthewayfoundation.org, and we'll connect you with Alan, with it's Bridges of Hope, right? Over in Tampa?
Bridging freedom.
Bridging freedom. Sorry, bridging freedom. So many bridges. Bridging freedom, right? There are dozens of organizations we can put you in touch with. And if you're like called to do prevention education, let me know. We're always looking for volunteers. So Alan, I'm actually going to say this out loud and you're going to laugh, but I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, I can talk forever, as you already know by now. I wondered when you asked me to talk about rural issues, if you knew it's because I was raised in Arkansas, and that was kind of a dig at me.
No, I was born in Arkansas.
Yeah, and I was raised there. So, but what you said at the end is you made that impassioned plea for everybody to get involved. I thought to myself a statement that I saw even yesterday looking at the United Way's website, and they had a statement on there that talked about, I looked around and saw the problem and wished somebody would do something about it. And then I realized I am that somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really becomes the critical piece. So I would encourage, along with Jan, I would encourage you to be the voice for the voiceless, the hope for the hopeless, and be the love for the loveless. Mm-hmm. You can do it, and together we can end human trafficking.
Yeah, we really can. Thank you, Alan. I so love and adore you. So just thank you, everyone that watched us on Facebook Live. I really appreciate it. You know, one of the biggest and easiest things you can do is share this conversation. We post stuff all the time. I post stuff all the time on my page. Just share, share, share. And the more we raise awareness, the quicker we can get this ended. And if anyone is really interested in this whole demand conversation, you Facebook message me, you contact me through our website, and I'll totally connect you with Corporal Wilkett, and we'll get this going. We're gonna affect the triangle. We're gonna take down the triangle. All right, y'all have a fabulous, fabulous night. Alan, again, thank you so much. I so appreciate you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.